In preparation for coming out tonight, I was really looking through the history of who has spoken at this event and where a lot of the companies have gone. And it's very true that there are some amazing alumni of having spoken up here, companies that have had these multi-billion-dollar outcomes. But as is very true with venture portfolios and companies in general, you end up with a very small number of companies that have these amazing stories. You end up with a order of magnitude more of them that just don't exist anymore and that have kind of gone to zero. And then you have an order of magnitude more, which are the companies that are in the middle. And those are the companies that are in the process of figuring it out, that are iterating their way to some kind of product market fit, that are trying to identify what their pathway to success actually is and what it looks like. And one of the things that became really readily apparent to me as I was figuring out what to talk about tonight in light of starting my new company is that I'm definitely one of those in-the-middle entrepreneurs. I am not somebody that is here with $1 billion outcome. I'm not somebody here with the story of having gone to zero. But what I do have is something really recent and interesting to talk about that hopefully resonates with anybody in the room that's working on innovating and creating products in the world of selling to people that are making data-driven decisions, which I think is the vast majority of us. Whether we're consumers of these products or people that are actually directly implementing them, it's relevant to take a minute and just talk about what that journey looks like and what the history of some of the landscapes around these products look like. About 2 weeks ago, I sold a company that I co-founded called Stitch Data for $60 million to Talent. And that acquisition, if you read it in the press, sounds like this amazing Goldilocks story of this 2-year-old company, 30 employees, no VC funding whatsoever, somehow goes from being non-existent to selling for $60 million of cash in a 2-year time period. The reality is, if you peel back the onion a little bit, Stitch is the outcome of 10 years worth of hard lessons learned, missed opportunities, strange pivots, and a whole lot of patience that finally yielded some version of a real outcome. It still, in a lot of ways, is a fraction of where a lot of the companies that you see present at meetups like this actually get to. And laced into that are just a lot of lessons learned around what it means to be building businesses in our space. So I hope you'll indulge me in just taking a little bit of a step through the history of what got us to that outcome, because I think there's a lot embedded in there that you may find relevant. At Stitch, our mission statement was to inspire and empower data-driven people. And one thing about selling to data-driven people that becomes really interesting is that building a company in this space ends up being really special, because when you talk about finding product market fit, you need to think about multiple dimensions. You end up in a place where actually going down the journey of building something that people want and that is successful and sustainable over the long term is actually not a one-dimensional optimization problem where you're saying, hey, let me go and iterate on my product until it resonates with the market. But it's actually a multi-dimensional optimization problem because the market itself and the underlying technologies are sometimes changing as rapidly as you can actually iterate on the products that you're building. So in our world, you end up needing a great product, but you also need this really timely execution and to be really cognizant of where the market's going next. So rewind the clock back to 2008. This is a picture of me wearing really ugly cargo shorts. My co-founder, Jake Stein, there. We left our jobs at a venture capital firm to start this company called RJ Metrics. And we had this vision of building a business intelligence solution that was full stack. And at the time, this was a big innovation because we would build software that had 3 components embedded into one individual SaaS product that you could buy. One of the components was ETL. We would pull the data out of all the disparate systems where it might live, all your sources of truth that you use to run your business. And then it was also data warehousing. We would actually store this data for you in the cloud. We would take care of optimizing the warehouse, managing the inflow of that data, making sure that it is optimized for analysis. And then we had a reporting layer on the front end where you could actually build dashboards and conduct that analysis and actually run your business and make more data-driven decisions. We quit our jobs on September 2nd, 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed on September 15th, 2008. So we had these big, and we came from a venture capital firm. We worked at Insight Venture Partners here in New York. We had these big dreams of building this venture-backed company. The entire venture capital market disappeared in September 2008. And from 2008 to 2011, the existence of this entire company was just marked by basically lean startup before lean startup existed. I think that lean startup book ended up coming out in 2011 or 2012. We were kind of living by this mantra of we do not have the flexibility to make risky investments in how we build this company, so we're not making any decisions without data. We are punting on anything that might be a gut check, anything that might be risky, until enough time has passed, enough data has been collected to actually make a decision about what direction to go in. We were forced into profitability. We spent really conservatively. The company actually moved from New York City and was headquartered in Camden, New Jersey for a couple of years just to kind of be able to pay the rent. And we were really, in a lot of ways, just waiting for the market to wake up to our product vision. And that mantra did end up paying off. We were felt like the tortoise in this tortoise and the hare race, where over time, cloud data warehouses, they still weren't really ubiquitous. Most data came from these databases in the back end, and APIs weren't really all that prolific yet. And the analytics stack was this marketing purchasing decision. So people did not want to care about the optimization of your warehouses, of your ETL. They wanted that taken care of in the back end, and they wanted to really be able to buy a dashboarding product and not worry about the rest. And the hype cycle status for that model really peaked around 2012 or so. By 2011, things were humming, and between 2012 and 2014, we raised $23 million in venture capital in the course of a seed, a Series A, and a Series B round, as we grew the business, at a pretty good clip. However, in that race, if we were the tortoise, the reality is that there were the hares at the same time. So we were competing with companies like Good Data and Burst and the mother of all fundraisers, Domo, which if you look at in the same exact time period between 2012 and 2014, Good Data, 25, 22, $25.7 million rounds. Burst, 26, 38, 65. Domo, between 2012 and 2016, 20 million, 60 million, 125 million, 210 million, and a $131 million round. This market was getting flooded with capital. And if any of you were out there buying business intelligence solutions or kind of looking in this landscape in this 2012 to 2014 period, you probably remember just being followed by ads everywhere. Just trying to get you to try out these products. And this was really just a time when the market got flooded with cash for solutions like these. And like clockwork, innovation struck everybody and basically broke the entire underlying premise that a lot of these companies were built on and forced us into pivoting. Because the release of Amazon Redshift and the data warehousing tools that compete with Redshift afterward ultimately threw a wrench right in the middle of this system. If you think about that diagram from before, where you start with ETL and then you put it into a data warehouse that's managed by the SaaS product, then you use that to analyze the data, what happens if people don't want to use your data warehouse anymore? What happens if there is something that is fundamentally better, that sits inside of your own cloud infrastructure, that's better for security, that's better for speed? Well, it just basically drives a wedge in the middle of the entire thesis behind what we built our company on. And as Google BigQuery came out, Snowflake rolled out, other solutions in the cloud became more and more widely used, it basically meant that people didn't care about our product anymore. And it created this massive opportunity for companies to sit on top of those data warehousing, those cloud-based data warehouses, and just serve the reporting use case in a far, far better and more flexible way. Companies like Looker came onto the scene, companies like Periscope, Chartio, Mode, and companies put out by much larger companies like Tableau, the Power BI product suite, Amazon released QuickSight. All of these BI solutions at their core now relied on sitting on top of these cloud-based data warehouse solutions and really made their way out to the parts of the market we were serving and frankly just started taking over for where we were. And this is really what happened when you think about product market fit, where if you look at us over time and this innovation curve, there's this moment when we start out in 2008 or so toward the left of that graph where our thinking around actually building a product that could actually help people was a little bit ahead of where the market was. We were in an economic downturn, investments in metrics, the release of the lean startup, data-driven decision-making was not yet mainstream, but we had this thing that we knew was the future. The problem was that the market innovated at a clip that was actually quicker than we were running, and we had this beautiful fit window. We had this amount of time between 2011 and 2013 where leads were coming in organically. We were growing the business at multi-100% a year, adding millions and millions of revenue a year, and able to raise a large amount of capital, but we failed to recognize the rate at which this adoption was bringing other entrants into the field and was impacting the way people think about technology innovation. And what happened is we got clipped by the market. The market actually passed us in innovation, and we failed to recognize that and pivot in time, which squeezed our addressable market. So on one side, we had these market dynamics pressing on us, where competition from all these other players and downward pricing pressure because the market was flooded with capital and people didn't care about the cost of acquiring acquiring customers, this was squeezing in our ability to actually participate profitably. And then from the other side, our product became less and less relevant because more and more companies that used to be in our target market suddenly gave control of the data warehouse over to DevOps, over to data teams, as opposed to letting marketers make the decisions about how to buy these analytics solutions. And this meant that all of our go-to-market strategy and the work we'd done to build our user personas was no longer relevant. And we failed to adapt to that quickly. So what we ended up with was this position where the markets that we found most compelling originally was basically every online company. Anybody that's doing business on the internet, that's using SaaS tools or databases in the background to store their data, to companies where marketing is still making the decisions about how to build an analytics stack. And really what that meant for us was mid-market e-commerce. Big e-commerce companies ended up with large infrastructures and system integrators that were managing this stuff. And companies outside of e-commerce, particularly SaaS companies, which was a big vertical for us, just ended up considering analytics more core and didn't want us managing that stuff. So our target market became really small, and that target market got destroyed in 2014, 2015. If you remember this time period, did anybody here work at Fab.com? I feel like, so if you asked that question in like 2012 in a meetup like this, half the room would raise their hands. Fab was a really large e-commerce company that built up here in New York, grew to hundreds of millions of dollars of capital raised, and then went to zero very rapidly. And in that period of time, there was this frenzy around e-commerce and investing getting made in it, and it made for a really awesome target market for us, but it was one that was not sustainable over the long term as e-commerce kind of fell out of favor with venture investors. So this is what happened. This chart on the left is from our board deck at the end of 2015. That red line is what our net new monthly recurring revenue was, and the blue line at the bottom is the actual. So we were, the business was still growing, but it was getting closer and closer to flatlining. And we ended up, we had a staff of about 125 folks in February of 2015. Or of 2016, sorry, we ended up laying off about 25 people in sales and support because we just could not generate positive ROI on outbound sales anymore because of those dynamics of the cost of acquiring customers. Things got really, really bad. But there was this one interesting diamond in the rough that was going on. And if you think about that map and you think about how there was this whole wave of players that came in from a data warehousing standpoint, and there was a wave of players that then were able to capitalize on that to start to dominate the BI industry, there was still that ETL piece. And we had built this really awesome framework for pulling data out of many, many disparate systems. At this point, it had gone from just pulling from traditional relational databases to NoSQL databases and APIs of all sorts and webhooks and event streams. And the tech had gotten really good. And at one of our hackathons in 2015, we had a group of team members actually break off all of the code, the microservices that represented that ETL component, and actually turn that into something that we could directly sell and point at our customers' data warehouses instead of ours. And we started selling that product. We called it RJ Metrics Pipeline. And it started growing. It was a real diamond in the rough, and it was still represented maybe 5% of the revenue of the company, but it looked way more like RJ Metrics did in that product market fit zone in terms of acquisition and retention, loyalty, and kind of just the net growth of the customers using it. Meanwhile, RJ Metrics, the core business, was a big business, but it was flat. And it was worth less than we thought it was because when you flatten out, your revenue multiples just turn into garbage, but it wasn't worthless. And around the same exact time, eBay was in the process of kind of detonating its corporate structure, and it spun out PayPal into its own publicly traded company. It took this division called eBay Enterprise and sold it off to private equity firms. And one slice of eBay Enterprise was Magento, which is an e-commerce platform. And Magento ultimately relaunched as a private company and went on an acquisition spree to basically acquire supplemental technology that would help make it competitive out in the market and hopefully make it a target for acquisition by a larger company. By the way, Magento was very successful in that. A couple of months ago, it was acquired by Adobe for $1.8 billion in a transaction that was a huge success for those private equity firms. But one of the companies that they bought in the process of kind of filling out their stack to make sure that they had the analytics solution that they needed was RJ Metrics. We bundled up RJ Metrics, ran a process, and found a home inside of Magento with one condition in that deal that we stipulated was absolutely necessary. we wanted RJ Metrics Pipeline. We knew that this technology, which they would probably vastly undervalue in terms of equity value in the transaction, we thought of this as the future, and we basically positioned it as what we wanted to work on after the core RJ Metrics business was sold. We spun that out. Magento got the RJ Metrics brand, so we couldn't call it RJ Metrics Pipeline anymore. Instead, we called it Stitch. And starting from day one, we had this massive focus that just we had never been able to have at RJ because of A, more than anything, a lack of experience, but B, just an inability to have the market context and vision to know exactly where this thing could be placed. We really focused on market dynamics. We really understood and focused on competitive players. We were lean but not cheap. We had this internal mandate to move quickly because the business was not capitalized extremely well. It got some of the money from the Magento deal to kind of keep the engines going. And we really also had a much better alignment of pricing and go-to-market strategy. This was much more of a self-serve product that was designed to sell into data engineering teams, which were able to be self-serve buyers and kind of grow organically. This thing grew fast. In 20 months, we had as many customers as RJ Metrics had reached in that 8-year time period. And we also made a move early on to open source our ETL framework that was powering the ETL engine behind the scenes in this thing called Singer that some of you might be familiar with, Singer.io. Still open source to this day, and the actual connectors that power Stitch are what runs there. So we ended up selling the business, again, a few weeks ago for $60 million to Talend in a transaction that we were really fortunate to get done. The product still exists. It's an awesome product that's now part of the Talend data integration family, so check it out for your ETL needs, et cetera. But meanwhile, in the midst of all this, I was very fortunate to kind of be able to not have an obligation to stay on for the earnout period, and I am going to be starting an entirely new company called Crossbeam. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the thing that I became fascinated with more than anything during the course of this entire saga was how extremely difficult it was to work with other companies to create leverage to grow our business. And a lot of that had to do with trust around data. And Crossbeam at its core is basically like a data escrow service that allows companies that are partnered with each other to combine their data sets in a secure, trusted, compliant, third-party data warehouse, analyze that data together without ever exposing the raw data behind the scenes, and then gain the benefits of the insights when you combine those data sets. So a ton of use cases for that. Happy to chat with anybody about what that means and who uses it. But anyway, I hope you all enjoy this little departure from deep in the data stacks and a little business story. Thanks.
So it's all pretty easy, right?
Real simple.
Since we're talking about, I guess the business aspect of all of this, as a CEO, how do you keep the team intact and the morale, and how do you navigate the human and emotional aspect of this?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, especially when you're going through periods where you're needing to lay people off. I mean, that's probably the most catastrophic thing that can happen from a morale standpoint, not just obviously for the people who are affected on that day, but then the next day comes and everybody that was not affected is still there. And I think the thing for us that ended up being more important than anything is really making sure that we were true to that vision that we were talking about and really building kind of a mantra at the company around being mission-centric and kind of driven by this idea that we were all here to get ourselves to a place where we were actually making the world, having the data-driven people that we serve be inspired by our product, be empowered. And because we are a company that works around analytics and metrics, we're able to tell that story a lot. We're able to put up on the TVs throughout the company the use cases and the studies and the signups and the journeys that all of our customers are going through. And by creating empathy for our customers and our buyers, it's extremely motivating for the team. And I think that's also just got to be true for the founders. It's got to show up in the day-to-day, the motivation and the passion that they show. And when you do that and you really create this empathy-driven, mission vision-driven environment, you can get past some hard times.
Mm-hmm. And at a personal level, I guess, what what drives you? I guess as an entrepreneur, you've gone through this journey. And by the way, congratulations on the acquisition. It's so happened that Mike from Talon was a speaker at the last event.
Oh, amazing.
But it's not related. But you're doing this for third time now, and the first 2 times worked out. But through sheer willpower and effort, why are you doing another one?
Yeah, I think a lot about the hackathons that we had at RJ and at Stitch, and we have now at Crossbeam, where they're my favorite days in running the company. They're the most fun. They legitimately end up influencing the product roadmap in positive ways. Stitch was born out of a hackathon and the existence of those things. And what's happening during that hackathon period is people are building stuff they want. They're not building stuff that sounds, academically interesting. By and large, the things that win those hackathons are people just feel a pain day in, day out, and they go and tackle a problem quickly that goes and solves that pain in some way. And that's all entrepreneurship is. And I think if you look at RJ and Stitch and Crossbeam, 1, 2, 3, these are problems that I personally felt as someone in the business world. When I was at Insight Venture Partners, RJ Metrics was just productized due diligence. This was the analytics that we were doing to evaluate whether or not a company was a solid investment. Cohort analysis, customer lifetime value, and trying to find a way to kind of productize and abstract away all of the complicated scaffolding around doing that analysis was where RJ Metrics came from. And then Stitch was a real problem that we saw over and over again in our own business and at our customers as they were kind of flocking to these other BI providers in 2014 and 2015 that brought it to life. And Crossbeam's probably the most true of all 3 of those, where it's just, if I had nothing to do and was sitting at home, tinkering on the computer in my basement, and I said, what's the thing I want to do that's going to be really fun and that's going to make my life slightly better? And those companies are always answers to those questions. And that's why I do it again, because it's the thing I want to do and there's nothing to do.
Fascinating. All right, do we have questions?
Elon Musk says about the entrepreneurship being like chewing the glass and then staring in the abyss of death. You went through this process several times, and you did answer about the drive part, but what kept your conviction on despite of so much of upheaval? And then secondly, did you have any loved ones who basically may have influenced your decision in this, that, hey, you better probably think of getting a stable career path or an income or something like that?
Yeah, great question. I think on the part 1 of your question, just the perseverance front, I had 0 gray hair when this all started. I'm 34 and I'm like the grayest person that you've ever seen, and that's a direct function of just the lifestyle of having done this. I have horror stories I'll tell you over a drink later around being brought to vomiting on some of the worst days of going through this journey. But at the end of the day, it's kind of this these 2 wave functions that add up to motivation. And one of them is the inspiration that comes from when things are good. You just increase the volatility in your life when you're doing these things. So the peaks are higher, the valleys are lower, but you do get these high peaks, and you can ride those highs really far and really, get inspired to continue on your journey on the promise of the next one. Then when it's low, there is something about being true to the commitments you've made and, actually being the backbone of the team that is kind of built around this mission and this vision that you started the company around. And when people are believing in that, they can actually prop you up in a really big way. And I think there's absolutely no way in a million years we would have come anything close to even this middle of the road success. My co-founder and I without each other. Having my co-founder, Jake Stein, there was absolutely critical. And then the teams that we built, who on some days were stronger than we were, on every day were smarter than we were, and really just kind of helped propel us and get us through those valleys. In terms of family, like I could not be more lucky or more privileged in kind of my origin story. I have a dad who's a teacher, who's an expert in public relations, who teaches at a small college in New Jersey. My mom, who's an accountant. They both love me. They've been supportive. They helped me get through college. And when I said, hey, I know that you helped me get through college so I could get this awesome finance job in New York, and now I'm going to quit. And by the way, the economy is crumbling. They said, awesome, how do I invest? And I think that that's something that, not everybody has in their lives. And I have a lot to be thankful for in that world.
All right, if we have another 30, well, okay.
In terms of the partners for the escrow, right?
Yep.
So are they anonymized? Do you have people who come and say, I have data that I'm willing to share, and I want to see whom else you're going to bring in and potentially determine the insights that way? Or are they pre-selected? Do they say, I really want to work with X firm to be able to come up with the insights?
Awesome. Thank you for asking a Crossbeam question. I was so tempted to just pitch Crossbeam for 15 minutes tonight, but I really wanted to get this story out. So just really quick on the dynamics of how Crossbeam works. The most important kind of conceptual thing about Crossbeam is that every single relationship that exists inside of Crossbeam is a point-to-point, peer-to-peer relationship between two companies that have some kind of pre-existing partnership or alliance outside of the network. So we're not a marketplace where people are selling data. We're not a co-op where everybody is tossing in anonymized data and some kind of aggregated insights get shared to all. This is actually about creating a means by which your existing partnerships can be force multiplied by introducing data into the conversation. And when you have co-marketing, co-selling, strategic alliance relationships, corporate development relationships, and channel sales partners, those are the big use cases where it's often extremely difficult to get data into the conversation. You're very often dancing around questions as simple as how many customers do we have in common and who are they? And Crossbeam kind of steps in as almost like Venn diagrams as a service, where people are able to securely push that data in, run those Venn diagrams, discover what's in the middle, and analyze that and potentially even expose it to partners without ever worrying about the rest of those circles being exposed anywhere. If I'm lucky enough, maybe I'll come back in a year or two and talk about the way all of that works, because it is actually a really fascinating challenge to run those overlaps in a hyper-dimensional space.
And you guys are based in Philly?
We're based in Philadelphia, yeah.
Okay. And recruiting?
Yeah, absolutely. Stitch, a talent company, is recruiting like crazy in Philadelphia, and honestly, probably in New York as well. And Crossbeam, we're a fully remote team. So we're recruiting all over. GetCrossbeam.com. Check it out if you want to learn more. And I think my email's up there.
All right, very good. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.